Bueno, pues Martin Kastner es diseñador, hace vajillas, hace las vajillas de Alinea, que es un restaurante que yo creo que todo el mundo que pretende saber de cocina moderna debería de entender. Estudió diseño y artes plásticas y fundó Crucial Detail. Martin, come on. Los dejo con Martin. Buenas tardes.
I don't hear the music, do you? But what you're seeing is a small video intro into our studio, seeing the operation, basically the way we operate. It's Crucial Detail is a very small design practice and a production studio. We're based in Chicago. We do a lot of projects that are targeted for mass production, but we also do a lot of limited edition series. Okay, now the music's playing, so I'm gonna shut up and I'll come back after dance. You don't need to see me again up there. So I guess I already mentioned kind of what Crucial Detail Design Studio is and does. I'll give you a little bit of a backstory as to how I got to designing tableware, if we can get the presentation going. But basically, I grew up in the Czech Republic in Eastern Europe. I trained as a blacksmith, and I worked for a castle restoring historical metalworks. And what this entails is retracing steps in period of the craftsmen that have come before us and trying to basically save their work by using the tools of the time. It's a very interesting. Okay, this thing should work. Okay, it's a very interesting type of work because you really get to study the way of thinking of time and period and place. But it's also very restricting because you're always thinking in somebody else's. You're following in somebody else's shoes. You're thinking somebody else's thoughts, and I wanted to explore something that would be a little bit more expressive, that would be a little bit more of time, and so I went on to study sculpture. While I studied sculpture, I met my wife, who's a photographer, an American, and she brought me to the States when she wanted to live closer to her family and finish her education. And I found myself being a blacksmith with experience of restoring historical metalworks at castles, with a master's degree in fine arts in the United States, which means completely unemployable. a professor of mine pointed at design as an area of activity that sits at an intersection between conceptual art and the culture of making and reproduction, which is something that I'd always been interested in. As a blacksmith, you're kind of ingrained with this passion for making things. So I started a small design studio almost, or probably 15 years ago, doing mostly architectural interior accessories. And while my wife was finishing school, she had a night job working as a pastry cook and bread baker at a French bakery. So at 4 in the morning, frequently I would get the call, please come in and help me make sourdough, make baguettes, roll out the buns. And I would come in and I was helping her, and I was really taken by the material. I was really intrigued by this expressive capacity that food, and bread in particular, has. Because as an artist, as a sculptor, you're always looking at this limit of where does this object stop, and where, like, there's always a barrier between you and the object. And when you're looking at food creatively, food enables you to cross this barrier. Basically, it's an object that gives you nutrition, becomes a part of you that gives you strength, and it also has this immense cultural charge. It really allows you. It brings tons and tons of emotions and memories. In my case, having grown up in Europe, come to the States, bread sucks, and being able to go to this one French bakery where the bread was, amazing, really connected me back to home. And I approached the chef she was working with. I also felt like, as exciting as this material and the potential was, I didn't have the skill set to really manipulate it expressively because, people spend a lifetime doing it. Many of you have. And I had at that point spent my lifetime doing something completely different. And even though conceptually I could connect to it, it felt like I would have to spend another lifetime learning the skill to manipulate this new material. So I approached the chef she was working for, and he was just not interested. He asked me for a cake pan. I made a cake pan. And then I kind of put it in the back of my mind and wasn't really actively pursuing the tabletop, but it really was something that I had thought of quite a bit. And one day I got a completely random email saying, hi, I'm a chef. I'm looking for somebody to design new ways of serving food. And I was really intrigued because he didn't ask for anything specific. He said new ways of serving food. And I thought that was an amazing challenge. So the email was from Grant Achatz, who at that time was just not known. So, I didn't know who he was. So I was like, sure, let's start a conversation. Like, why do you need it? Like, every design project starts with that question, why? Because if you can answer why in simple terms, you can probably articulate an answer for the direction of the design progress from that point pretty easily. If you cannot answer why, you shouldn't be doing it. And we kind of started a conversation, and he's like, well, for one, tabletop hasn't really evolved over the past 100 years in terms of the vernacular, in terms of the language and function as well. And B, we have all these ideas we have all these culinary concepts, things that we can execute really well. We can make it in the kitchen, but by the time we get it to the diner, either the consistency isn't right, it doesn't feel like a 4-star experience, it just doesn't really feel like it is up to par. So I'm looking for somebody to kind of have a conversation with and explore like whether there is something else we can do that wouldn't be constrained by the standard of time. And I kind of figured that the reason the tableware hasn't really evolved over the last 100 years and the reason why it looks the way it does is versatility. Like as a restaurateur, everybody needs an item that's going to be very versatile, very flexible. You can use it for a lot of things, and that will do the job fairly well. But in our case, we actually had the luxury of forgetting about versatility and focusing on refining particular elements of the process, of the dining experience. And that's a great luxury that most restaurants don't have. And that's something that we had explored in our collaboration. And the trajectory of the collaboration has been, it started pretty much focusing on the delivery vehicles. Then we started looking at the restaurant experience as a whole, and eventually even taking what we've learned outside the restaurant. So among the delivery vehicles, the first challenge from Grant was as how to serve a sphere of ice. He wanted to serve a palate cleanser that would be in the shape of a sphere, but feel like a 4-star experience. So it wouldn't be on a spoon, it wouldn't roll around. Effectively, we're looking for a solution for a refined version of a lollipop. So I designed a tripod that collapses when you pick it up into a single handle, and you can basically eat it as much as you like. Then you can spread the legs, stand it back up, or just lay it flat back on the plate. And so this first design was made in my kitchen very quickly, and it worked fairly well, and the response was amazing. Everybody loved it. So we were like, well, maybe there's something we can actually do, and we started a conversation that was a little bit more long-term. So the next challenge in terms of the culinary ideas was how do you serve a thin ice chip? They were able to mold ice very thin, 2 millimeters thick, that you put on your tongue. It dissolves in a flash and disappears. Basically, it cleanses your palate without any icy residue on your tongue. But they couldn't get it to the table because it would disintegrate before it would actually get there. So my solution was just a disc of borosilicate glass that sandblasted to create a thin layer of air between the frozen ice and the basically carrying device. And effectively it works like an Indian refrigerator, meaning you throw a piece of ice in a hole and it will stay cold for a really long time because the cold air has nowhere to go. The cold air has nowhere to go. So this works much in the same way, where you could take a 2 millimeter thick ice chip and it would you would expand its lifespan from 2 minutes to about 15 to 20 minutes. So you could actually deliver it to the diner. Another concept that we had explored is a single vehicle from preparation to consumption. It actually started with a frustration of mine with a skewer that was served on a plate with a knife and fork aside that you're supposed to tackle. So you're utilizing 4 utensils in a way that's fairly dangerous. So I felt like that we could leave the danger aspect there, but reduce the number of elements involved. And because we're looking at a tasting menu format, a single bite is a lot easier to present on a self-supporting skewer than, let's say, a full meal would be. One thing that this piece actually did, the antenna, for us was, we found out that there is a real value in stopping the conversation at the table when you want their attention. So when you bring the antenna out, people stop talking and they really pay attention to the food. The other thing it does that actually was not by intent, it controls exactly which element of that dish is gonna hit specific parts of your palate, of your mouth. So you can control what's gonna hit the soft palate, the roof of your mouth, left side, right side, front, back. So you can play with textures, sound, and also sweet and saltiness, which was a really interesting feedback that we got. And we realized that a lot of these tools that we're creating are actually informing the cuisine in return, that basically once the chefs have a new tool, they kind of run with it and do their own thing. Another challenge was simultaneous experience of hot and cold. My solution was a wax bowl, and it was something that goes all the way back to my childhood. As a kid, we used to get these really bad ice cream bars that were chocolate coated. The chocolate was awful. It was very waxy, but when you touched it, it didn't feel cold even when it was frozen. And I remembered this for some reason. And when he basically challenged me to design a piece that would serve hot and cold simultaneously, I remembered wax as being an edible material that you could actually use. In this case, the wax bowl is not to be eaten, but it is a carrier. So the wax bowl is made on premises every day at the restaurant, and it's chilled. The bowl is pierced with the pin, and then a piping hot potato is set on top. So the diner is instructed to pull the pin out. Basically, the potato drops into the soup, and they slurp it like an oyster and experience both the hot potato and the cold potato soup. Another one of the challenges was non-sating fireworks of flavors at the end of the meal, kind of mignardises. Where the bites were so small, there are a couple of grams of jellies and nuts and fruits and spices where you couldn't really pick it up with any kind of a real utensil. So I made a miniature utensil skewer that elevates the pieces above the table that allows you to eat it in a sequence, remove the skewers, and you can consume them one at a time. Another source of inspiration would be unusual techniques. This one is it's kind of a strange technique they developed at Alinea, which is spraying fruit juice into the air over a deeply frozen piece of metal. And as the juice fog deposits onto the metal, it freezes before contact and it deposits real snow. Which real snow is, you know, like something that people try to achieve in many different ways. But in this case, you're actually mimicking nature, and it works very well. So my service piece for that was basically a very heavy piece of stainless steel that's dipped in liquid nitrogen, and it's inserted into a conical handle. So you eat it kind of like a snow cone with a spoon. But another frequent request would be separating liquids and solids in an organic fashion on a plate, where most conventional plates, to separate liquid solid in one space, you have to put a ramekin on a flat plate or use, you know, some sort of a combination or increase the viscosity of the sauce. I started thinking about it, and I realized that in a landscape, it happens all the time. We have rivers and valleys where we were separating the protein from the liquid. So I basically developed or designed a line of plates that are inspired by various natural landscape elements that I call the landscape plates. One of the more recent projects or challenges was a short-term infusion vessel for cocktails. Is when the Alinea team opened their bar called the Aviary in Chicago, they came up with an idea of a tea-based cocktail, a short-term infusion that takes place over, now I don't know if I did something wrong, but it doesn't seem to be progressing. I don't know. Can we skip to the next image? I don't know. Basically, the concept is a tea-based cocktail and dried fruit-based cocktail that evolves over a period of 30 minutes. So you get to witness the change, the infusion and transformation of the drink, both in terms of the color and the flavor of the drink. And my solution was a porthole, because I realized that what we're really looking for is not so much a teapot as it is a window into a different space and a different time. So if we get the next slide to come up, we'll actually see it. But it's effectively a window-like system where it's two flat pieces of glass with a spacer in between that can be preloaded from the sides with the infusion elements and then infuse over time. So that's not it, but it does look kind of like that, actually. It's the AA logo is not that far from the porthole. I don't know, let's see. Let's see. I guess they should serve the cocktails. Like, we have the 30 minutes now, so we could witness the infusion as it would happen. Okay. Now. Okay, can we just progress to the next slide? I'm not sure. There might be an error in the file. I don't know. Or the clicker stopped working. Not sure which. Okay, so this takes us. Can I go back? Okay, so this is the porthole. So like I mentioned, it's a very simple mechanism where there's a spacer with two pieces of flat glass. What it does, it allows you to load dry ingredients that are larger. Like conventionally, if you're doing this in a bottle or in a mason jar, you either have to throw it out at the end of the infusion, or you have to use a jar with a big neck. So this way it allows you to load it from the side, fill it from through the spout, and then watch the infusion take place and evolve. As a part of the challenge, you need a glass that's small enough and unstable, so you're guiding the behavior of the drinkers. Because what you don't want is for people to take a little sip, set their glass down, and wait, and then mix the next pour, because the pour is going to taste and look completely differently. So the small nip glasses don't have a foot, they roll around, you kind of have to drink them, don't have a choice. You set them down, you refill them, and you take the next one, and you get a completely different experience from the next sip. So like I mentioned, after looking at the delivery vehicles, we started thinking about the restaurant experience as a whole. The first thing that struck me as odd about going to Trio, which was then Grant's restaurant, was the menu. It was a list of dishes. It was a list of ingredients. And as a list of ingredients, like I wasn't terribly food literate, and a lot of those things I'd never heard of. Their juxtapositions were really strange. They didn't make any sense to me. So I felt like what we should really try to do is create an infographic and visually communicate what kind of a journey we're going to experience. So the bubble graph, or the circle element graph, left to right scale is sweet to savory, size of the bite is communicated by the size of the bubble, intensity of the flavor by the intensity of the, in this case, white color. So you kind of see that the chef during the course of the tasting menu is actually taking you on this kind of like a double sine wave tour. And once we had this infographic to document the menu, the interesting thing is after a year, you see that there's clearly a pattern when you overlay all the menus. So you can either see it as a proof of a system that works, or a challenge to make it, to change it around and make it different the next year. Another element of the Alinea dining experience were centerpieces, where we wanted to do centerpieces that become an active element during the course of the meal. So they're not just decorative, like a candle or a flower would be. So in this case, this was a ginger root that we were slicing and using pins to support it. So it gave the diner a preview of the the flesh of the ginger before it was juiced into the dish. The next one would be a honeycomb. So the piece for this would be a honeycomb extractor. So we would extract honey tableside and pour it over a dish as a garnish. This one would do a similar thing with limes, where the limes would be used as a bottom of a vessel and then punctured, squeezed, and poured over a dish. This is a chopstick rest and a bud vase holding herbs, where the idea was using heat to release aroma, in this case from the rosemary twigs. So the brick is heated. It's used as a final cooking dish en route from the kitchen to the table, because the meat is cooked sous vide, then it is seared on the brick as it's transported to the guest. And the rosemary twig, when it's inserted into the brick, releases a lot of aroma. So you're not actually getting the astringency, the bitterness of rosemary, you're only getting the scent. So you're only getting the olfactory part of it. A similar idea with protein as a garnish. So we froze, or I shouldn't say we, but the idea was to freeze a very thin piece of Wagyu beef, let it somewhat thaw tableside, and then spread it over a heated vegetable, where the meat would just basically add the fattiness and the flavor to the bite, inverting the conventional relationship of a garnish and a protein. Another element we're really interested in was human interactions with servers, kind of the way they're engaged in a 4-star environment. And what would happen if the diners were directly handed items, which at that time was not something that you would expect, again, in a 4-star environment. So the dish here is a palm bowl. And again, to guide the behavior of the guests, to kind of guide them through this, there's no foot on the dish, so they cannot set it down. the fork intentionally destabilizes the assembly. So even if they did try, it will fall. So the guest doesn't have a choice but to eat the solid bite and chase it with the liquid that's in the bowl. To mitigate this kind of almost threatening experience, the piece is made out of cream-colored porcelain that's sanded into a very, very smooth finish. So when you actually touch it, when it's handed to you, it's a very pleasant experience. So it mitigates this kind of direct interaction with the server that wouldn't normally be expected. Another element would be guest participation. In this case, it's a 2D, 3D piece, which is a build-your-own dish. It was inspired by an IKEA shelf, where you get a flat pack and then instructions, and you have to build your own dish. So in this case, it's a flat pack. The guest actually builds the frame. The pasta gets draped over the frame. It's rolled into a wrap, eaten, and then folded back down flat and goes back to the kitchen flat. And one thing that Alinea frequently does is events outside the restaurant. And it presents a whole other set of challenges, which is, for example, feeding 800 people in an hour. And our goal has always been to eliminate a lot of extraneous elements like paper plates or plastic forks and all those kinds of things that just go straight from the chef's hand into the garbage bin, barring those 2 seconds of holding the food on it before the guest eats it. So in this case, it's an antenna row. It's inspired by the self-supporting skewer, where it's a machine where the diners press on the bottom counterweight, which lowers the skewer to your mouth height, so you can just take a bite, walk away, and then the skewers come out, so they are basically constantly, it's played almost like an organ, where the chefs constantly replate a row of dishes, where the skewers go back, get washed, come back, replate with food, and go back on the piece. Again, this piece brings the food eye level so that it completely changes your perception of a dish, and it makes it visible across the space, which is sometimes really beneficial at an event. So even when it's surrounded by people, you still have a sense of what's happening there, what's going on. Another case would be food as its own delivery vehicle. This is bacon row, which is dehydrated bacon. Dehydrated bacon is rigid enough that it can be used as its own vessel. So the bite is prepared on this wire contraption by the chefs, and then it's taken from the wire contraptions by the guests. So there's no mediating paper plate. There's no, other than a small napkin for the guests to wipe afterwards. We've kind of eliminated all the utensils and throwaway plateware that would be normally required for a dish like this. Another interesting challenge is inspiring caution in people. When the bite is extremely delicate, like in this case, it's a foie gras puff, or it's a cinnamon puff filled with foie gras and apple jelly. The bite is so delicate that if you're not very careful as you're picking it up, you're gonna crush it. You're gonna destroy it, and it's gonna fall apart. So my solution was using these sharp wires as kind of cautionary sign for people to come in and approach it very, very gingerly. So it would eliminate the possibility of people just coming, grabbing, and crushing the bites. Another interesting element is that at events, you have a sense of a lot of product moving through, a lot of food moving through, and there is a real kind of path of destruction that normally you're trying to hide away from the guest. But in this case, with the honeycomb piece, I was actually interested in showing the trace of destruction. So the food is contained in these sculptural honeycomb pieces. The guests break through them, which is really satisfying because you actually get to feel the pop of the paper. And then it also shows kind of the patterns of behavior, and I think it gives us a lot of really interesting visual feedback as to how people go through space, how they kind of interact with objects, and it always ends up empty, which I always felt like there would be somehow parts that people wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable breaking, but I guess if there's food inside, they'll just go and they'll destroy it. And I think that ends my presentation. So what's next in terms of our explorations is really kind of pushing what we've learned, the way that food can inform design, design can inform food, out of the restaurant environment. Because when you think about the restaurant, you always have a sense of a very transactional nature. You're coming in, you're paying for a dinner or a dining experience. And what we're really interested in is getting rid of that connotation and exploring simply food as an expressive element rather than nutrition at that point. So there's a lot more in the pipelines, but yeah, it's to be continued. Right. Thank you.